from this, we can apply that to the pragmatic theory of art, saying that whatever the artist is trying to portray to us, the message or the meaning, it shapes our knowledge of our personal knowledge to contribute to our shared knowledge of a certain event, and that we won't necessarily see that event the same, as that we are using that to contribute to our personal knowledge and to shape our perception of that event, and that we will always use that. And that's where we would use reason and almost intuition to figure out what we're trying to, how we are going to use that as personal knowledge. And then our counterclaim is that art is a form of expression, and this theory states that art was seen as the means of portraying the unique individual feelings and emotions of the artist, and good art should successfully communicate the feelings and emotion which the artist intended to express. So this uses emotion rather than reason to portray the artist's feelings of whatever he or she is portraying. So in our sense, Colin is, instead of portraying the meaning of racial oppression and like trying to educate us on the event and his feelings and his perception of it, he could be targeting our feelings and our emotion and using how he's feeling to make us have a shared experience and a shared emotion of the same way. And Tolstoy says, art is a human activity consisting in this, that one person consciously, by certain external signs, conveys to others feelings he has experienced, and other people are affected by these feelings and live with them over in themselves. So as we know about what Colin did, it affects how we feel and how we will look at minority rights now. And yeah, so it just shows how the personal knowledge of the artist works at our shared knowledge of the event or the emotion they're trying to portray in this.
Go back. Yeah. In Tolstoy's, what he's saying can be connected back to the development one with the great man theory, that without this symbolic event it's referencing, the emotion portrayed wouldn't be significant. So they're obviously taking these emotions from specific events to trigger emotions in their audience and create that shared knowledge.
Yes. And I'd also like to add that we can use, if we were to look at art from a certain time period to try to educate ourselves on an event, and we were to look at protest art, we can use the emotion and the meanings that they are portraying through inductive reasoning and make it less of a certain event and more general to create our shared knowledge, to like add to our shared knowledge of that event. So we are taking it to be less specific and more general as we can connect them together. So the mini conclusion is that art expresses the artist's personal beliefs, which becomes a shared experience by the audience. This affects our perception of the event. And back to Colin, is he vocalized his personal beliefs and emotion through his act of protest, which influenced how people's perspective on oppression shifted as they either disagree or agree with what he is opposing. So whether you agree with what he's doing or not, it's still going to influence your personal knowledge, which will then influence your overall shared knowledge of the event of racial oppression. And we can also relate this back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the U.S., who is generally viewed as belonging to the liberal side of the court, responds by saying Kaepernick's protest was dumb and disrespectful. And we just found this to be surprising because she is very for minority rights. And although they have the same shared knowledge on minority rights, they have their personal knowledge that is different, but it doesn't necessarily affect their shared knowledge.
Yeah, so that just goes to show that like all the shared knowledge, like things are going to have to differ, like where they're getting their shared knowledge from, because that influences their own personal knowledge and the way they've gone out and seek this out, because they're having these different, being on the different sides of this protest. Just to kind of look at this from like outside our culture, if our society wasn't based as strongly on civil obedience and the respect of authority, our view of these protests and the influences they have on history wouldn't be as significant as we're considering them to be. Because like I said before, like violence, it gets looked at as not in as much of a negative light in a different culture. These wouldn't be violent, nonviolent protests would be one and the same. And if authority wasn't as big of a figure in a country, the the kneeling to during the national anthem wouldn't be as significant to them. So you just have to kind of take yourself out of it and realize that it's like these problems aren't everywhere, and this is definitely part of our confirmation bias of like wanting to know like we respect authority and we like have to live and obey like civil obedience. That is allowing us to like look at these protests and the influences they have on our society a certain way. Yeah, our final conclusion is all protests influence shared knowledge of a society to some extent. They symbolize problems in a society and bring them to the attention of the people through the means of intention and emotion. This allows their message to be a part of the society's shared knowledge, like we discussed. Colin Kaepernick's act of protest is now a point in history that is going to be examined when considering shared knowledge of minority rights. So, like I said earlier, when this is studied in history, whether we want it to or not, whichever side you're on, this is something that they're going to look at, and it is going to shape their shared knowledge of what was going on in our society at the time. This protest has an influence on the shared knowledge. So, yeah.
Okay, could you go back to your second development for me real quick? Okay, so you are connecting your ways of knowing reason with your first claim and then emotion with your counterclaim, correct?
More like,
Yeah, intuition. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you believe that emotion can actually play into your claim by saying that emotion can start a protest? Would you support that?
I do think that there is emotion behind the protest, but we're looking more at what the artist is trying to do as the first claim says that they're trying to portray a meaning and get a certain like theme across, while our counterclaim is saying that the artist is trying to make their emotion
targeting
expressed
emotions rather than just the knowledge of something. I think is
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm thinking about the role of sports as a vehicle for all of this happening, and its context to art as well. Can you maybe comment on how you see the role of sports in society is closer to art or closer to something completely different, or politics as art, or what you're trying to get at there?
I definitely think sports, with being in the media as much as it is, can be looked at in an art form, and that it definitely, can be looked at through the art perspective. I also think that, I don't know, I think
it relates more with like racial oppression, more of in a political sense of, I was thinking art more as like political cartoons and stuff like that, but I don't think that his actions aren't considered art either, as it could be considered a performance, but I don't think it necessarily connects.
And I think that other protests through sports, because it does happen probably a lot, it's a good platform for it. I think that it can be looked at outside of art and history, like altogether.
Yeah. And that's kind of also what, through the media, we were kind of connecting that to the great man theory, that he is using his ability to get out there and it be well known what he's doing to contribute to his protest. As if we were to go to an Ozark football game and someone were to stand, not kneel, it wouldn't be as big of a deal because they are not going to get the media attention that where everyone it would contribute to our shared knowledge of minority rights.
Yeah, and the role of protests in sports in general is really interesting because sometimes it's intended to be completely performative rather than about the contest. So like within the, second wave feminism or whatever, you had this, Billie Jean King versus Bobby Riggs was set up as to be this, strong woman versus this, this kind of sexist man, and the act of them actually playing was this collective shared knowledge event.
Sport, it's just the actual
And so this doesn't have anything really to do with the sport, but it's about the celebrity.
I guess that dovetails a little bit with the just before we wrap up. I assume there might be other questions from the room, but it dovetails just a bit with my question. On expressionist theory, expressive theory of art, does it matter if he views his act as a forum of protest, an art forum as protest? Does it matter what what he would say about that act within that theory particularly?
Yeah, I definitely think that if he's behind it as a protest, then when it's out there and if they're like asking him about it, then he'll be able to advocate for it as a protest more so. And then I believe that it would definitely elevate the level to which it is protest.
As you brought up great man theory and viewing history through society, did you? Just a question: where did you pick these theories up? Where did you? How did you come across them? Great man theory, and then the work of Herbert Spencer.
I don't know how research. I don't remember.
We were just trying to see we were
No, we
researching
talk about it.
thinkers and philosophers that just kind of how they ones that focused on the influence of history. Yeah, how did we?
I don't know. Who knows
I don't
where it
know.
could come from? Probably. I know where it didn't. It's certainly not the class of the teacher. Couldn't have come from there.
You're right.
Oh,
We're
it
not talking
stings
about that at all.
on a Friday all the more.
Okay, but, I can't even justify that, but I did come across this and I thought it was really interesting. And it was ringing some bells, You mentioned it, so I'm interested.
I only ask because not only do I know that Seth covers it, but I also know that I'm quite sure, I could be wrong, maybe I'm misremembering. I think Great Man Theory is in our book, isn't it? Or am I misremembering?
We don't read the
Maybe
book.
not.
It's in the book.
Uh,
We don't read the book. We don't read the book.
I think it definitely is.
My only point
No,
is
I
a lot of
think
great
that-
content there, right?
Yeah.
Are there other questions or comments from the class on this?
Since we're on this development,